Okay, so let's look at the next phylum, the third phylum, which is Platyhelminthes. So now we're going to enter the worms, okay, the classification for worms. So Platyhelminthes is also known as flatworms. Okay, now we're going to classify Platyhelminthes. So going back, we look in terms of whether it has a true tissue. So if it has a true tissue, the organism is a eumetazoan. And we're going to split it in terms of its symmetry and the germ layers. So if the symmetry is radial and diploblastic in terms of germ layer, it is under the phylum Cnidaria. Okay, the second option is whether the symmetry is bilateral and diploblastic. Okay, so diploblastic is basically they contain endoderm, mesoderm, and ectoderm in terms of the germ layer. So going to split it more in terms of the presence of xylem. Okay, so xylem is basically called the body cavity. So if that organism, the animal, is a bilateral and triploblastic and does not contain xylem, it is called as an acoelomate. And all those animals that does not have acoelomate and is a bilateral and triploblastic germ layer, they will be classified under the phylum Platyhelminthes. So, the unique characteristic of Platyhelminthes is that it is considered to be a flat worm because it has a flat body dorso-ventrally. It is considered to be eumetazoan as it has true tissues. The symmetry is bilateral and have cephalization, meaning it has a head region which contains concentration of sensory organs. It is a triploblastic germ layer and an acoelomate. So in this diagram, you can see a ladder-like nervous system. So this blue structure is basically the nervous system, the nerves of the Platyhelminthes, a very simple sensory nerve. Since the Platyhelminthes does not have a body cavity, the digestive system is incomplete and may be absent in some. The excretory system, which contains protonephridia, which are called flame cells, are used for osmoregulation. In terms of respiratory and circulation system, it is very lacking, but they undergo those processes by diffusion. In terms of reproduction, many will reproduce asexually. Most are monoecious, meaning they are hermaphrodite, but some practice cross-fertilization. Okay, so we're going to look in further detail an example of an organism under phylum Platyhelminthes, which is the Taenia species. Okay, the Taenia species. So Taenia species are all endoparasitic tapeworms, meaning they live inside other organisms, particularly in the digestive tract. So the shape of a Taenia species is long, flat body composed of a sclerax. So the sclerax is the head. So here in this diagram, this is the sclerax, and many reproductive units called the proglottids. So here, this very long flattened area is the proglottids. So here, the cross section of the proglottids. Inside of the individual proglottids has a male and female organ. You can see the testes and the vagina inside. And mostly, the sclerax here has suckers and hooks for the attachment in the intestine. Okay, the hook and also the sucker, the round part, in which it will suck the nutrients from the intestine. So this flatworm, this Taenia species, is covered with thick cuticles called the tegument because the tapeworm is living in the host digestive system that contains a lot of harsh enzyme. So this tegument, these cuticles, provide a protective layer. The Taenia species also lack a digestive system. So when it lacks a digestive system, it has to have its nutrient from the external environment, which is the intestine. The whole body of the Taenia species is covered with small projection similar to the microvilli to help increase the surface area for absorption of nutrients. This diagram shows the life cycle of the Taenia species. So let's look at the primary host, which is the human. So inside of the human small intestine, there live the mature worm, okay, the mature tapeworm, in which they have proglottids. Okay, so it will eventually mature, and inside of the individual proglottids contain the shell larva. So because they are segmented here, okay, the proglottid can detach itself from the main worm and move to the posterior end of the primary host, the humans, in which it will be released out into the environment through the feces. Okay, the feces may fall down onto the ground and be eaten by other animals such as pig or cow. Okay, so the pig and cow is known as the first host to eat the larva, and inside of the pig and cow, the larva may develop and encease to form sister cercae, usually inside of its muscle. So, if that pig or cow is slaughtered and be undercooked in terms of beef and pork, that undercooked beef and pork may contain the larva and infect back into a human primary host. However, the larva developed into adult worm may cause little harm inside of the human body. However, the sister cercae is more dangerous than the adult worms in human, as it will stay inside of the muscle or even the brain matter instead of the small intestine. So the fifth phylum that we're going to look at is phylum Nematoda, still in the realm of worms. So these worms are called as roundworms. So let's look how we classify animals under Nematoda. So the first things first, we look whether it has a true tissue or not. So if it has a true tissue, it is a eumetozoan. And then we further look whether it is a bilateral symmetry and triploblastic germ layer. And then we further look at whether it has a xylem, the body cavity. So if it does has a xylem, we need to further divide it in terms of whether that xylem is lined by a mesoderm or not. So if does not line by a mesoderm, we call it as a pseudocoelomate, and that is classified to be Nematoda. So organism or animals that is a eumetozoan, bilateral and triploblastic, contains xylem but not lined by the mesoderm, which is pseudocoelomate, is classified under the phylum Nematoda. So the word nematos comes from the Greek word for thread. So that's why it is also typically known as a roundworm. So the habitat of the nematodes are very widespread. They are mostly free-living, in which you can find it in marine, freshwater, soil, tissues of plants and animals. And the example for nematodes that we're going to look in more detail is Ascaris species. The characteristic of nematodes is that the shape is cylindrical with tapered ends, as you can see in this diagram below. Okay, so the blunt end here at the anterior side is the head, and the fine tip, okay, the sharp point is the posterior end, most likely the tail end. They are known to be mostly dioecious, meaning they have separate sex, meaning they have the male and female. The male is usually much smaller and has a sharp kink in the end of the tail. Okay, so here, posterior end, it curves slightly, the sharp kink. Okay, it has unsegmented round. It is an unsegmented roundworms, so they don't have a segment, and they are considered to be eumetozoan, have true tissues, and they are also considered to be bilateral symmetry and has cephalization, meaning they have a anterior head. So the nematodes are considered to be triploblastic, meaning it has 3 germ layers: the mesoderm, the ectoderm, and the endoderm. They are also pseudocoelomate, meaning they have xylem. However, the xylem are not lined by the mesoderm. So the fluid in the pseudocoel, okay, in the diagram you can see it is part of the green layer, okay, formed a hydrostatic skeleton. Its digestive system is considered to be complete, meaning it has a mouth and an anus, so one direction here. A nervous system, because it has a distinct dorsal and ventral nerve cord. A respiratory and circulatory system, however, it's a bit lacking but the nutrients are transported throughout the body via the fluid in the pseudocoelom. Okay, the pseudocoelom. And the body is covered by a thick transparent cuticles on outside. As a worm grows, it sheds its old cuticle by the process of adhesis periodically and has only longitudinal muscle, which causes whip-like movement. So the parasite Ascaris lumbricoides are mostly commonly found parasites of humans in the tropical countries. The adults live in the small intestine, and the female can lay up to 200,000 eggs a day. The shell larvae are released in the feces and extremely resistant to unfavorable conditions. When the larvae are eaten in uncooked vegetable and soil, they hatch in the intestine. The parasite can also penetrate the intestine wall and travel before it reaches back to the intestine and become mature. In the intestine, it can cause abdominal symptoms and allergic reaction within the host. In large number, they can cause intestinal blockage and may cause death. Let's enter the fifth phylum, which is phylum Annelida, which is also considered to be the last part of the worms. Okay, so we're going to look at how annelids are going to be classified. So first things first, the presence of trochanter. So annelids are eumetazoan, and in terms of symmetry, it is bilateral and has germ layer that is triploblastic. Okay, and then it does contains a coelom, yes. And then if that coelom is lined by a mesoderm, it will be classified as eucoelomate, meaning true coelom. And then we can further divide it in terms whether they are a protostome and a deuterostome. And annelids are considered to be a protostome because they develop the mouth first. And then we're going to look at in terms of segmentation, the presence of segmentation. So do they have a segment or not? So annelids contain segmentation. So yes. So if it is a eumetazoan bilateral triploblastic, has coelom, and the coelom is lined by the mesoderm, is a protostome and has segmentation, it is considered as annelids, phylum Annelida. So we're learning about the complexity of the worms from Platyhelminthes, Nematoda, until the Annelida. And those two worms from the previous phylum does not have segmentation. However, annelids is the first worm to start to develop segmentation. So this is called the dividing up of the body. So body without a segment cannot control their movement precisely. So when the septa divide the coelom into a series of compartments, the components of the body system, meaning the nervous and muscle system, are separated in each segment, meaning the system is contained in one of the segment. So this body plan is called a metameric segmentation. Okay, so this enable it to control the body movement by separate segments independently and specifically. So that's why phylum Annelida are segmented worms. So the characteristic of phylum Annelida is that it has a shape that is cylindrical with the metameric segmentation. So that is the unique part of phylum Annelids. They are also considered to be eumetazoan, meaning they have true tissues, bilateral symmetry, and has cephalization, triploblastic and eucoelomate, true coelom, fluid in the coelom, which helps in the hydrostatic skeleton for locomotion and protects the internal organs, and also the function of the coelom allows the development of complex organ. So the digestive system is complete from the mouth until the anus, in which the mouth develops first. That's why it's called a protostome. In terms of excretory system, it has the metanephridia, and the respiratory system consists of the skin, gills, and parapodia. The circulatory system is closed, with the blood vessels being completed, and the body is also covered by a transparent cuticles that helps it from the harsh environment, especially in the soil. The muscle consists of a circular and longitudinal muscle, causing much complex movement. And lastly, it is mostly monoecious but can undergo cross-fertilization if they need to. So the example for the organism and the phylum Annelida is Ferretina species, which is an earthworm. Okay, so this earthworm contains long hair, and the name of this long hair, as you can see in the cross section, is setae. Okay, this long hair is called setae. So for one segment, so this is an example of a segment of the earthworm. It has 4 pairs of setae. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 pairs of setae. So this organism also has a structure called the clitellum. So you can see it here in this diagram. So the clitellum is basically the bulk part of the worm, in which it will secrete a mucus cocoon. So it also where the embryo develops into young worms within 2 and 3 weeks. So one of the major role of the earthworm is in terms of soil aeration. So the earthworm eats the soil, okay, inside of the soil. The soil mixes with the mucus before it is digested, adding the nitrogenous waste to the soil, helping the mixture, okay, the mixture and texture of the soil. The earthworm enriches the soil by bringing the subsoil to the surface and mix it with the topsoil. The potassium and the phosphorus is brought upwards, and it adds the nitrogen to the till, the earth, and also exposes the mold to the air. So this is called the soil aeration process. It also drags that organic material closer to the root of plants, meaning it will help in terms of the compost for the plant to survive.